think the stars belong to man, but there are older dreams out there, louder ones, cruder ones, gods at laughing green. Before there was a prophet, there was only dust, red, choking dust, and the sound of crude boots stomping through wasteland. Before the visions and crusades and shattered worlds, there was just another orc, one among millions. Brutal, yes. Strong, yes. But not yet touched by something greater. Not yet divine. He was born on Urk, a savage, primordial forge of ceaseless violence. It was a place where war was not just waged, but worshipped, where orcs fought not for territory or wealth, but simply because the fight was to live, to kill was to breathe. And in that grim theater of endless brutality, an orc named Ghazghkull Mag Uruk Thraka began as nothing more than another brawler in the mud. He had no grand name, no followers, no glory, just his choppa, his rage, and the smell of blood in his nostrils. Then came the bullet. They say it was a simple slug round, an enemy round that tore through his thick skull during a clan scrap. A lucky shot. Maybe it should have killed him. Maybe it did. But Ghazghkull didn't die. He remembers pain, blinding and raw. He remembers the sound of his own roaring heart, fading into nothing, and then something else. A crack in the veil. A vision, not a dream, not madness. A truth older than the stars. He stood before Gork. Or maybe it was Mork. Or maybe both, grinning with mirrored maws in one impossible face. Divine fists like worlds, laughter like the shattering of suns. And in that impossible moment, Ghazghkull saw destiny. Not a path lay before him, but a tidal wave of destruction he was meant to become. He awoke different. Mad Doke Grotznik was the one who dug the slug out his brain, replaced chunks of it with whirring metal, cybernetics, and crude implants. But it wasn't the metal that changed him. It was the vision. He rose from that operating slab roaring of gods and war, preaching, yes, preaching, an orc, speaking like a prophet, not just about fighting, but about WAAAGH, not just as an urge, but as a holy tide, a living force. At first, they laughed. Orcs always laugh, until he started winning. Not just fights, but hearts, as much as orcs have them. His words echoed something primal, something the orcs didn't even know they were missing. Purpose, not just violence, but divine violence. He told them that Gork, or maybe Mork, had spoken to him, had shown him the truth of the galaxy. That war wasn't just a way of life. It was a way of being. And he would be the chosen prophet to unleash it all. That was the beginning. He stopped being just another orc. He became something more. A flame in green skin. A storm-gathering mass. His eyes blazed with something no other war boss had. Conviction. Not merely the love of battle, but the absolute certainty that every fight he picked was sanctified. Every war was holy. Clans began to listen. Not because he was the biggest, though he was big, but because there was something else, something in his voice, something in the way he stared through you, like he saw a future only he could touch. They followed him out of awe, out of terror, out of instinct. And so the boy from Urk, bullet scar and half machine, became a prophet, a living banner of the gods. And the WAAAGH began to stir. But even now, after all the wars and legends and cities crushed beneath his boot, no one knows if the vision was real. Was it truly the gods? Or a warped hallucination from brain damage? Does it matter? Because the galaxy believes it happened. And that belief has power. It is said that Ghazghkull believes so completely in his destiny that reality bends around it. That the WAAAGH itself listens to his will. That he speaks, and orcs hear the voice of God behind his words. Madness? Or miracle? Whatever it was, it transformed one orc into a juggernaut of prophecy. The stars had no idea what was coming, because from that moment on, Ghazghkull was not just fighting to win. He was fighting to fulfill a vision that could burn the galaxy down. And this was only the beginning. He would rise. He would unite. He would roar across the void with the fury of ancient green gods behind him. And nothing, not man, not machine, not even time, would stop him. The prophet of the WAAAGH had awakened, and he was hungry. A spark in the dark isn't just light. It's warning. It's prophecy. And when that spark is green, when it howls the name of Gork and Mork, you don't see the light. You see the fire that comes next. Ghazghkull Mag Uruk Thraka did not rise like other war bosses. He didn't claw his way up through attrition and brute intimidation alone. No, his rise was different. It was inevitable, like the pull of gravity, like the detonation of a sun. On the blasted plains of Urk, something ancient stirred when he returned from his so-called death. He was louder, stronger, more terrifying, yes, but there was something else. He carried himself not like a warrior, but like a herald. The other orcs, crude and violent and blood-hungry as ever, couldn't understand what they were feeling. Not at first. Was it fear? Was it awe? No, it was belief. A primal, instinctive need to follow this mad, metal skull prophet who roared the will of the gods like scripture. They say that the war boss who loses his mind is bound to lose his war. But Ghazghkull's madness was not weakness. It was fuel, a holy fire behind his yellowed tusks. He began preaching of the great WAAAGH, a tide not yet born but coming, a cataclysm that would roll across the stars and bring all orcs into one purpose, one storm. He claimed that Gork and Mork had shown him this future in visions. Not just a prophecy, but a command, and then he started building it. Clans across Urk, splintered, feuding, leaderless brutes, began to take notice. Ghazghkull didn't just smash his rivals, he converted them. Orcs who fought him either died or bent the knee. He'd smash their bosses and preach to the survivors, standing atop piles of skulls as he roared the gospel of the gods. And they listened. He wasn't just gathering warriors. He was forging crusade. Word spread beyond Urk. Weird boys, those freakish orcs who channeled the raw psychic energy of their kind, began twitching, speaking in tongues, consumed by visions of green fire and stomping iron. They spoke of a rising power, a prophet, a storm named Ghazghkull, and like iron filings to a magnet, the orcs came. From nearby systems, from derelict hulks and forgotten outposts, a tide of green muscle and madness drawn to the voice that echoed in their blood. Ghazghkull welcomed them with teeth bared and arms raised. Each warband that joined him fed the momentum. Each conquest gave him more supplies, more scrap, more speed. He did not simply absorb them. He transformed them. No more petty squabbles over shiny bits or territory. No more waiting for a good scrap. Ghazghkull delivered the scrap, planet by planet. Each campaign bigger than the last. Each battle sanctified by the words of the prophet. WAAAGH, Ghazghkull had begun. The early crusades were wild and brutal. Planets fell like dry leaves beneath a hurricane. Imperial outposts, merchant colonies, agri-worlds, all swallowed by green fury. He was carving a bloody trail through Imperial space, and it was only the beginning. Each conquest was more than victory. It was ritual. Orcs would paint their armor, their banners, even their teeth in the colors of their clans, but all bore the mark of Thraka, his face stenciled in crude oils, his name chanted like prayer. WAAAGH, Ghazghkull. He built war engines the size of cities, cruisers and kill cruisers that blocked out the stars, Gargants, walking gods of iron and flame. He led from the front, always, and when he spoke, his words ignited the air. Weird boys would convulse and explode in his presence, overwhelmed by the raw WAAAGH energy, Storms of green lightning rippled across battlefields. Not metaphor, not fantasy. Reality, warped by the collective belief of billions of orcs. And Ghazghkull was at the center of it, a psychic nexus of green violence and religious fervor. He spoke of a greater crusade still to come, a world the gods had shown him, a prize worthy of the true WAAAGH. He called it Armageddon. The name stuck. But before that great war could begin, the galaxy would bear witness to a rising horror. A war boss no longer driven by instinct or greed, but by divine mandate. He was not trying to win battles. He was trying to awaken his kind. And they awoke. By the millions, they poured into his ranks. Even rival war bosses, too big and mad to kneel, couldn't ignore him. Some he destroyed. Others he converted. He offered them not loyalty, but purpose. And for the orcs, who had only ever known war as a game of dominance and boredom, this was revelation. Ghazghkull wasn't just organizing the WAAAGH. He was weaponizing belief itself. Each war he fought strengthened him, not just in numbers, but in power. The WAAAGH is not a force you measure in tanks or ships. It is psychic momentum. And Ghazghkull understood this better than anyone. He didn't just gather orcs. He ignited them. And somewhere in the immaterium, something laughed. Something approved. Because whether by madness or miracle, Ghazghkull Thraka was becoming more than a war boss. He was becoming inevitable. And his WAAAGH had only just begun to crawl. Soon it would run. And when it did, the stars would bleed green. What do you do when the end wears a grin? When the apocalypse doesn't whisper, but bellows across the void, daring you to stop it? You pray or you run. But on Armageddon, there was no place left to hide. There are many words for war in the Imperium. Purge, campaign, crusade. But none quite capture the madness that descended on the hive world of Armageddon when Ghazghkull came. It was the year 941.M41 when the sky cracked open. Armageddon was not some backwater outpost. It was vital, an industrial juggernaut churning out weapons, tanks, and supplies for the Imperium's endless wars. A world forged in fire, scarred by pollution and ash, ruled by titanic hive cities that towered over wastelands of chemical rot and steel. It was no stranger to conflict. Its people were hardened, its armies vast. But what descended upon it was not a war. It was revelation. Ghazghkull had chosen this world. Not randomly, not by mistake. He claimed he had seen it in his divine visions. A gift from Gork, or Mork, maybe both. A world meant to burn. A world worthy of WAAAGH. And he came not as a raider. He came as a storm. His armada eclipsed the heavens. Cruisers, kill cruisers, rocks, and void-ramming monstrosities of scrap and madness. An entire sector's worth of orcs, drawn by the psychic gravity of Ghazghkull's vision. They pour from the void like locusts. Their ships scream through the atmosphere, crashing into Armageddon's surface with seismic fury. And behind them, from the largest cruise of them all, came the prophet himself. Ghazghkull Mag Uruk Thraka, warlord of Gork and Mork, roared into the poison winds and declared the beginning of holy conquest. He did not land on the outskirts. He went straight for the heart. High Volcanus fell within days. Overrun, swallowed whole. Not just by orcs, but by belief. By sheer psychic weight. Orcs flooded its tunnels and spires like green magma, shouting hymns to their gods, leaving nothing but ruin and teeth. Imperial forces scrambled. Steel legions deployed. Titans marched. But nothing stopped the tide. The orcs were coordinated. That alone sent a chill through every tactician on the planet. This was no rabble. This was an army, directed, channeled, cult-like in their devotion to a leader they claimed spoke to gods. And Ghazghkull? He was everywhere. Wherever resistance was strongest, he appeared. leading from the front with Gork's fury in one claw and Mork's cunning in his eyes. He mocked defenses, redirected strikes with unnatural precision, as if he knew where they'd hit before they did. Hive Tartarus fell. Then Hellsreach was besieged, and as the Imperium staggered, a single name was whispered from trench to fortress. Commissar Yarrick, Sebastian Yarrick, a man forged in duty, sharpened by faith, and burdened with like iron. He was not a general, not a warlord, just a commissar, but he had something few others did, an unbreakable refusal to kneel. He took command at Hellsreach, and there, in that choking furnace of smoke and blood, the legend began. The two met not as equals, but as archetypes, the prophet and the judge, chaos and order, green fire against black steel. Yarrick held the hive against impossible odds. His discipline turned panic into defiance. His fury inspired broken men to rise and fight again. And Ghazghkull noticed, the prophet of the WAAAGH, had never seen such tenacity in a human, never seen one so stubbornly alive. He began to respect Yarrick. In the Ork way, through hatred and fascination, the more Yarrick resisted, the more Ghazghkull wanted to break him. The war raged for months. Front lines shifted. Hives burned. The sky itself seemed to bleed. But the Imperium, somehow, endured. Yarrick's efforts inspired a wider counteroffensive. Adeptus Astartes from the Salamanders, Blood Angels, and Ultramarines chapters arrived to aid in the defense. The tide, ever so slightly, began to turn, and Ghazghkull left not because he was defeated, because he had seen enough. He withdrew his forces, not in chaos, but with terrifying discipline, a retreat not of weakness, but of calculation. He had tested the world, tested the Imperium, tested Yarrick, and what he saw excited him, because Armageddon in his eyes was not yet worthy of destruction. It was worthy of a greater war. He would return. He promised it with a roar to the stars. He carved it into the flesh of prisoners and sent them back. He painted it on the walls of broken hives. I'll be back. The war had not ended. It had begun. Armageddon had merely been introduced to Ghazghkull's vision. The real WAAAGH, the one the gods whispered him in fire and blood, was still coming. This was just the second war, and the next would drown the stars. Some enemies you kill, some you forget, but some you carry with you, like a scar that sings with every step, like a name that tastes like fire. Ghazghkull Thraka left Armageddon not in shame, not in defeat, but in prophecy. He retreated not to lick wounds, but to prepare. And in that retreat, he carried something unexpected, not loot, not conquest. He carried a name. Yarrick, Commissar Sebastian Yarrick, Iron Will of Hellsreach, the one human Ghazghkull had not crushed, who had refused to die, whose defiance had burned so bright it caught the attention of the gods themselves. Or so the Orks said. Because of the Orks, stories are power, myth is momentum, and the myth of Yarrick exploded like wildfire through Ghazghkull's ranks. They began to revere him, not with love, with fascination, with respect, the kind only an Ork can give to an enemy who refuses to break. Yarrick became the boogeyman of Ork campfire tales. Watch your back, or the old human with the Bernie, I'll get ya. They spoke his name in the same breath as Thraka's, opposite poles in the same mythic storm. But this wasn't one-sided. Yarrick, too, was changed. He had stared into Ghazghkull's madness, into the eyes of something that should not exist. An Ork who believed in something beyond instinct. An Ork who planned, who prophesied, who had left Armageddon not because he had lost, but because he had chosen to wait. Yarrick knew, deep in his soul, that Ghazghkull was not finished, that he would return, and so he made it his life's mission to stop him, It became obsession. Yarrick petitioned to pursue Thraka across the stars, to hunt him down, to extinguish the flame before it could spread. But the administratum, in all its blindness, denied him. So Yarrick did what only a Commissar with faith stronger than any chains of bureaucracy could do. He refused to be denied. He followed Ghazghkull anyway, across war zones, through subsector storms, into the teeth of WAAAGH, Essen Bloom. Wherever Thraka went, Yarrick was not far behind. A hunter in black, a ghost in his shadow. It was no longer merely war. It was personal. And Ghazghkull, far from being angered, was delighted. He wanted Yarrick to follow. He began leaving trails, challenges, messages scrawled in blood and graffiti on the walls of ruined worlds. Where's Yarrick? Old man, come find me. Can Yarrick counter WAAAGH? It was a game to him, a divine chess match between prophet and persecutor. He even began sparing Yarrick's life in skirmishes, letting him escape, mocking the near-death encounters, not out of mercy, but because he wanted their duel to continue. Because in his mind, Yarrick was no longer just a foe. He was part of the prophecy. And for the orcs, who believe with such intensity that belief shapes reality, this rivalry became real. They believed Ghazghkull needed Yarrick, that they were destined to clash again and again until the final WAAAGH swallowed the stars. And that belief gave the rivalry power, a psychic resonance in the warp, an echo of two titans locked in orbit, drawing entire worlds into their gravitational fury. Yarrick, in time, had himself rebuilt, just as Ghazghkull had. After losing his right arm in combat, he replaced it with an orc power claw, the same size, the same symbol as Ghazghkull's. A challenge, a statement. I am your equal, it said. I will end you, it promised. But the orcs didn't see it as defiance. They saw it as reverence. To them, Yarrick was not mocking Ghazghkull. He was honoring him, emulating the prophet's might. And Ghazghkull loved it. Their saga rippled through orc culture. Rivalries became sacred. Enemies were not just things to kill, they were icons. Yarrick became a symbol of the perfect fight, a foe so strong, so unbreakable, that defeating him would make the WAAAGH immortal. To kill Yarrick was not just victory, it was ascension. And yet, Ghazghkull never tried too hard to finish him. Because the truth is this, Thraka needed Yarrick. Every prophet needs a heretic. Every god needs a devil. Every story, a shadow. And Yarrick? Yarrick was that shadow. The Imperium called him a hero, a martyr, a savior. But Ghazghkull saw something deeper. He saw his reflection. Two beings forged in war, refined by belief, carved into myth not by choice, but by destiny. And as the years passed, as the galaxy burned and the stars dimmed under countless WAAAGH, their rivalry became legend. Not just a feud, not just a vendetta, a mirror. And mirrors, no matter how distorted, always show the truth. Ghazghkull Thraka, Sebastian Yarrick, two names forever chained in the song of war, one seeking holy conquest, the other sacred vengeance, and neither willing to let the other die. When the prophet returned, it was not as a warlord, it was as a storm made flesh. The sky burned, the ground screamed, and all across the planet, a single word rose like thunder through fire. WAAAGH. 57 years had passed, long enough for wounds to scar, for hives to rebuild, for the Imperium to lull itself into a lie, that maybe, just maybe, Ghazghkull Thraka would never return. But orcs do not forget, and prophets, they keep their promises. In 998.M41, Ghazghkull came back to Armageddon. He did not sneak. He did not strike softly. His armada tore through the void like a jagged wound, larger than before, hungrier, more focused. This was not the brawling chaos of the Second War. This was purpose. War not as reaction, but as ritual. It was the largest Ork invasion since Ullanor. Billions of greenskins surged behind him. Their ships blackened the stars. Their war engines were impossibilities of iron and madness. He brought not just bodies, but doctrine. Orcs organized. Orcs strategic. This was what made the Third War different, and infinitely more terrifying, because Ghazghkull had learned. He had spent decades absorbing the lessons of 1,000 battlefields, watching the Imperium, testing its strengths, exploiting its weaknesses. The Prophet had become a general, and his WAAAGH followed like zealots, every step a beat in a cosmic drumroll toward annihilation. He split his forces, a masterstroke. One half hurled itself at the equatorial jungles of Armageddon's southern continent. Swamp warfare. No trenches. No straight lines. The Orcs thrived. They bogged down Imperial Guard divisions, consumed regiments whole. The other half struck the hives directly. This was Ghazghkull's genius. Attack everywhere. Drown the defenders in too many fronts, too many fires. And at the center of it all, himself, wreathed in smoke and fire, his presence electrifying the battlefield. He descended with a fleet of gargants the size of cities, rolling temples of war. Around him swarmed his most elite knobs, battle-hardened monsters, hand-picked disciples of the WAAAGH. They bore his face painted across their armor. His name screamed into the sky. WAAAGH, Ghazghkull wasn't just an army. It was a doctrine. The Imperium responded. Steel legions once again took up arms. PDF forces rallied. Reinforcements poured in. Titans of the Legio Metallica. Space Marines from the Black Templars, Salamanders, Blood Angels, and more. And at their heart, Yarrick. Old now, scarred, half machine, but unbroken. He returned to Armageddon not as a Commissar, but as High Lord Commander of the Defense. The man whose very name struck fear into greenskins across the galaxy. Ghazghkull's chosen enemy. They were drawn to each other like magnets. The war erupted into chaos. Spanning months of meat grinder conflict. Hive after hive besieged. Plains turned to mud and blood. Trenches swallowed thousands. Hellsreach, once again, became a focal point. Black Templars made their stand there. Space Marines of such zealous fury, they seemed born for this war. And above it all, Ghazghkull moved like a god. He didn't just fight, he commanded. His war engines coordinated strikes. His boys executed complex flanking maneuvers. He issued orders with clarity, instinct, and brutality. And the Orcs listened because he believed. And belief is everything. Orcs do not follow because of rank. They follow because of power. And Thraka radiated it. His presence amplified the WAAAGH. A psychic storm of such magnitude that weird boys exploded simply by standing too close. He walked through battlefields like a prophet through flame. Gork's claw, a power claw the size of a truck, tore through tanks like paper. His roar shattered Vox channels. But for all his might, the Imperium did not fall. Not entirely. Hive Acheron burned. Death Mire drowned in blood. But Hades' Hive, long lost, remained a warning. The war stalled. Not because Ghazghkull weakened, but because the defenders endured. Because Yarrick, yet again, refused to die. Their confrontations were titanic. In the ash wastes of Armageddon Prime, the two met face to face. Their duel did not end in death. It ended in meaning. Ghazghkull laughed. Yarrick bled. The WAAAGH screamed. And then, once again, Ghazghkull left. Why? No one knows for certain. Perhaps he felt the WAAAGH had reached its peak and wished to preserve its momentum for another theater. Perhaps the gods whispered a new vision. Or perhaps, as before, he was not here to win, but to shape the myth. The Orcs call it a glorious crusade. The Imperium called it a Pyrrhic defense. The casualties were beyond count. Armageddon was saved, but not victorious, because the green tide had not been stopped. It had simply moved on. Ghazghkull had proven his vision again, proven that orcs could organize, could plan, could conquer, and worse still, he had kept his promise. I'll be back. He had come, and every world that saw the green smoke rise thereafter would know. There is no peace. Only the next WAAAGH. You think there's horror in war? You've never seen joy in it. Not until you've seen two apex predators, each born to devour the stars, unleashed on each other like gods in heat. That isn't battle. That's exaltation. After Armageddon, the galaxy watched and hoped that maybe the storm had passed, that maybe the prophet of the WAAAGH had spent his fury, that maybe the green tide had reached its high water mark. They were wrong. Ghazghkull Thraka wasn't finished. He was evolving. The third war for Armageddon wasn't a climax. It was a crucible. It refined him, taught him, hardened his faith. Every hive burned, every titan toppled, every duel with Yarrick. It all carved deeper into the truth he believed with unshakable certainty. War was not the goal. War was the sacrament. So he did not rest. He did not vanish. He turned his eye, bloodshot, glowing, divine, towards something new, the Octarian sector, a region already lost to madness, already in flames, not from orcs, not from man, from the Tyranids. High Fleet Leviathan had slithered into Octarius like a knife under the ribs. A tidal wave of perfect, mindless hunger, the great devourer. It consumed worlds with the cold silence of predator that knew no joy, no fear, no anger, only need. Most would run from such a threat. Not Ghazghkull. He chose it. He looked into the abyss of Leviathan and he smiled, because he saw a gift, a crucible, a meat grinder in the void. He saw a worthy test of the orcs. What happened next was unprecedented. Ghazghkull redirected the course of his WAAAGH, not toward imperial space, not toward conquest, but into the mouth of the Tyranids. He invaded Octarius, flooded it with orcs, not to claim it, but to escalate it. He didn't want victory. He wanted the perfect fight, because the Tyranids never stopped coming, never surrendered, never broke. They were the only enemy who could match orcs for endless, mindless aggression. But where the Tyranids fought out of instinct, the orcs fought with joy. And Ghazghkull was counting on that. He unleashed the WAAAGH on an ecological apocalypse. And it worked. The orcs and Tyranids became locked in a war so feral, so constant, so devastating, that it began to warp the sector itself. Worlds changed. Civilizations vanished beneath the grinding gears of organic and mechanical warfare. Hive spores rained from orbit, while gargants thundered across jungle worlds. Squigs and genestealers tore each other to pieces. Tyranid synapse networks cracked under the WAAAGH. Energy and orc psychers burned out from sheer ecstasy. This was not a mistake. This was Ghazghkull's design. He wanted his boys to be tested, to become stronger. Because in orc logic, there's only one path to greatness. To fight and fight and fight again until the WAAAGH roars from your pores and even the warp flinches at your name. And the Tyranids provided endless fighting. No breaks. No diplomacy. No boredom. Perfect. Even the Inquisition took notice. The Death Watch sent kill teams. The Ordo Xenos watched breathless. Because for the first time in recorded imperial history, two existential threats had been tricked into canceling each other out. And it wasn't chance. It was strategy. Ghazghkull may not understand the warp or the deep folds of imperial bureaucracy, but he understands war better than any man alive. He understands the rhythm of destruction, the tempo of slaughter, and in Octarius, he was conducting a symphony of carnage. He was building something, not an empire, not a territory, a forge, where the weakest orcs died, where the strongest became monsters. New war bands rose from flames. New war bosses forged in the blood of Tyranids. And they all believed, because belief was the fuel. And Ghazghkull's belief was unshakable. He told them, "This is the will of Gork and Mork. They gave us a galaxy full of bugs to bash, so bash 'em." And they did. The WAAAGH howled with newfound fury. And Ghazghkull watched from his cruiser throne, like a dark messiah, as his children tore and bit and laughed and died in glorious combat. And the Tyranids? They didn't care. They couldn't care. They just ate. And so the war raged on, unstoppable, insatiable, eternal. No negotiations. No surrender. No mercy. Just a perfect storm. And while the galaxy panicked, Ghazghkull thrived. Because this wasn't the end of his WAAAGH. This was practice. A testing ground for the apocalypse yet to come. And deep in the shadows of the Octarian War, one name echoed louder than the rest. The prophet of the WAAAGH. Still undefeated. Still laughing. Still coming. Some things can't be killed. Not because they dodged the blade, but because the blade doesn't matter. Because their belief is louder than their heartbeat. Because death is just a pause between screams. Ghazghkull Mag Uruk Thraka died. Or so the galaxy whispered. It happened somewhere between the fires of Octarius and the gathering storms of the Indomitus era, a moment lost in the tides of unrecorded slaughter. The orcs don't log dates. They don't write histories. They live them, in scars, in roars, in the echoes of craters. No one agrees on how it happened. Some say a lucky shot from a Titan's plasma cannon vaporized half his body. Others claim a Tyranid bio-Titan crushed him under its seething mass. There are even whispers, too insane to be dismissed, that Yarrick himself finally brought him low in one last private duel. But the details don't matter. What matters is this. The prophet of the WAAAGH was gone, and the orcs didn't know what to do, because he wasn't just a war boss anymore. He was the voice of Gork and Mork. He was the reason they gathered, the reason they charged, the reason they believed. Without him, the WAAAGH faltered, not defeated. Orcs never stopped fighting, but uncertain, fractured, less like a crusade, more like a riot. For a time, Ghazghkull's name became a legend in mourning, until it wasn't, until something moved, until the mad dope brought him back. Mad Doke Grotznik, a lunatic even by orc standards, a pain boy whose medical knowledge was matched only by his disregard for reality. He had been there when Ghazghkull first rose from his bullet wound years ago on Urk. He was there again. But this time, he did more than fix. He rebuilt. The prophet's shattered remains were dragged from the edge of the battlefield, twisted, half-pulped, barely a torso. But where any sane surgeon would see a corpse, Grotznik saw potential. He cut, welded, grafted, screamed, and somewhere in the haze of pain and fury, Ghazghkull woke up, not healed, changed. He was bigger, stronger, meaner, a new warplate forged from the remnants of wrecked gargants. His missing limbs replaced with divine weapons. Gork's claw, a power claw the size of a dreadnought's hull, crackling with energy that didn't belong in the material world. Not tech, not entirely. Something else. Something touched. And Mork's roar, a shoulder-mounted plasma custom weapon that belched destruction like a god's sneezing rage. It didn't fire. It spoke. And what it said was death. Some said the machine's spirits within it were warped by the WAAAGH. Energy. Others whispered that the weapon never had machine spirits. That what moved inside it was something pulled from the warp, bound in iron and madness. But the truth, as always with Ghazghkull, is this. He believed it was divine. And so it was. He called it his resurrection. Not survival. Not repair. Resurrection. He stood atop a rock in orbit, his new warplate steaming, his eyes burning like twin reactors, and declared, "The gods ain't done with me." And the orcs heard, across the void, in 1,000 warbands and mobs and fight pits. They felt it, a ripple, a psychic shockwave of raw green joy. The prophet had returned. But he was different now. Stranger, more silent at times. His visions more frequent. He would stop mid-battle, gaze into the warp-torn sky and laugh. Or whisper. What did he see? No one knows. Not even Grotznik, who now follows him like a priest follows a saint. But what's certain is this. Death didn't kill him. It clarified him, made his belief unbreakable. He had stared into the abyss between worlds and come back not with answers, but with conviction. He was no longer just a prophet. He was proof that orcs could bend reality with belief, that gods walked among them, wearing armor of scrap and teeth, that nothing, not man, not Xenos, not the warp itself, could stop a WAAAGH led by Ghazghkull Thraka, not even death. And the galaxy? It trembled again, because they realized that Ghazghkull had not just cheated fate. He had taught the orcs a lesson, a new truth. That belief could rebuild the dead. That dying wasn't failure, it was fuel. And now, wherever his shadow falls, the green tide rises stronger, not just roaring, worshipping. The prophet is risen, and he is not finished. The galaxy broke, split like bone under a god's hammer. Empires shattered, stars bled, and in the screaming dark, where even hope burned out, the prophet laughed, because to him it wasn't the end. It was a beginning. The great rift tore open the heavens. Reality cracked. The cicatrix maledictum, a raw wound through space insanity, split the Imperium in two. Light failed. Warp storm screamed. Planets disappeared beneath demonic tides. The Astronomicon flickered like a dying candle. For many, it was the end of everything. But for Ghazghkull Mag Uruk Thraka, it was beautiful. He looked into that roaring Terran reality and saw freedom. No longer did the stars belong to the corpse god. No longer were the routes of conquest bound by the Imperium's defenses. The galaxy had fractured, yes, but cracks are where growth begins. And for the orcs, it was open season. Ghazghkull surged into the Indomitus era like a beast unchained. His WAAAGH, already massive, swelled into something more. Not just armies, but movements. Not just invasions, but awakenings. He didn't just lead battles. He led belief. War bands across the galaxy began to call themselves Sons of Thraka. Rocks painted with his face screamed down into hive cities. Orc cruises tore apart black Templar fleets in the void between stars. And always his name preceded him. Not whispered, roared. WAAAGH, Ghazghkull. The Imperium watched in horror as systems fell without warning. Some to invasion, some to sabotage, some, most terrifying of all, to conversion. Because Ghazghkull's vision had grown. No longer was it about conquest. It was about infection. The spread of a new kind of orc. One that believed. And belief, as always, is dangerous. Imperial records began to shift. Inquisitors reclassified Ghazghkull not merely as a war boss, but as a potential perversion of the warp. A being whose psychic footprint may now rival that of a demon prince. Not because he traffics with chaos. Ghazghkull hates chaos, but because the WAAAGH, energy that surrounds him, that emanates from him, bends reality in ways too dangerous to ignore. He isn't just using it, he is amplifying it. Every time he preaches, planets quake. Every time he roars, weird boys rupture from the strain of channeling his vision. And yet he keeps moving. No throne, no fortress. Ghazghkull is never still. He is a comet made of iron, teeth, and fury. His latest crusade tore through the Commissar drift, shattered the forge world of Harrow Deep, and left an Imperial Night House burning in its wake. He rides in a massive battle fortress, a mobile shrine to destruction, surrounded by a retinue of mechs, weird boys, and his personal elite, the Ghazghkull Thraka. They chant, they fight, they believe, and behind them, a trail of worlds lies burning. Even Guilliman, The Return pre-March, Lord Commander of the Imperium, has named Ghazghkull as a threat of galactic significance, because it's no longer about where Ghazghkull is. It's about where he's going, and no one knows, except him, because he still has visions. In the middle of battle, in the silence of orbit, in the lull between crusades, he sometimes goes quiet, stares into the void, muttering to Gork, or Mork, or maybe both. And when he speaks again, it's always the same. Not yet done. Got one more WAAAGH. In me, the big one, the real one. And his boys cheer, because if this wasn't the real WAAAGH, then what's coming next must be holy. And across the stars, Imperial commanders tremble at the reports, because Ghazghkull is still active, still recruiting, still fighting, still changing. And if death didn't stop him, if the rift freed him, then maybe nothing in the galaxy ever can. He is the storm on the edge of every Auspex scan, the shadow on every frontier moon, the roar behind every green tide. The prophet of the WAAAGH is still out there, and he is not slowing down. You can kill a beast, crush a horde, burn a war band to ash. But how do you kill a story? How do you stop a name that spreads like fire through blood? You don't. You endure it. You fear it. Ghazghkull Mag Uruk Thraka is no longer just a warlord. He's a myth, and myths in Warhammer 40K are more dangerous than armies. They shape reality. They linger. They infect. Among orcs, his name is sacred. He is spoken of in reverent screams, painted on banners, carved into the armor plates of Gargants. He is the prophet, the one who speaks of the gods, Gork and Mork, whose every war is a sermon in flame and fury. And it's not just rhetoric. The WAAAGH, energy, that strange psychic current orcs generate through collective emotion and belief, follows him. It warps physics, makes the impossible happen. Guns fire because orcs believe they will. Machines run because they should. And Ghazghkull? He's a locus, a black hole of belief. In his presence, weapons shoot straighter. Orcs fight harder. Reality twists. The WAAAGH doesn't just grow, it awakens. He's changed orc culture in ways even Imperium is only beginning to grasp. Once, orc warbands were scattered, lawless mobs driven by chaos and chance. Now, more and more are becoming crusades. Holy wars. Orcs are starting to form hierarchies, not out of control, but out of shared vision. That is Ghazghkull's greatest victory. Not the fall of a hive city, not the death of a chapter master, but the transformation of his species into something more dangerous. A species that believes, and belief is power. Even outside the orc race, his name casts a shadow. Imperial citizens whisper it like a curse. Children cry it in nightmares. Imperial tacticians study his every move, praying to predict the unpredictable. And Yarrick, even now, gone, presumed dead, or perhaps waiting in some corner of the void, his ghost lingers in Ghazghkull's legacy. Because their duel wasn't just blood and blade. It was a mythic polarity. The zealot and the executioner. The prophet and the heretic. And Ghazghkull still talks to him, out loud, during war councils, to empty rooms. Some say it's madness. Others say it's memory. The orcs say it's respect. Because even a god needs a rival. And Ghazghkull Thraka, he's becoming one. A living god, a green messiah of flame, claw, and endless war. And his myth is only getting louder. There are many monsters in the galaxy. Some stalk the shadows, whispering from crypts of old. Others reign from thrones of gold and fire, draped in ceremony and silence. But only one stands atop a mountain of bones and scrap, laughing as the stars burn around him. His name is Ghazghkull, and he cannot be stopped. This is not the tale of just another orc. This is the story of the orc, The one who saw something no other greenskin dared to see. Not just war, but meaning. Not just blood, but purpose. And when he rose from a bullet wound with half his brain replaced by whirring junk and iron plates, he didn't just survive. He awoke. Ghazghkull Mag Uruk Thraka began his journey on the dust-choked death world of Urk, no different from a million other orcs. Violent, stubborn, simple, until the gods or the wound in his skull or the madness of the warp showed him a vision, a revelation. Gork, or Mork, or both, laughing, smashing, calling him to greatness. And he listened. From that moment, he was never just a war boss. He was a prophet. His voice carried weight beyond words. He didn't bark orders. He delivered sermons. And the orcs, brutal, anarchic, wild, followed him, not out of fear, but faith. He built his early WAAAGH, not with raw power, but with divine momentum. Clans from across systems united under his banner, not just to fight, but to be part of something bigger, something sacred. The WAAAGH wasn't just war, it was destiny. He struck the Imperium like a hammer. Worlds fell, systems drowned in green flame, and then came Armageddon. There, he wasn't just a threat, he became a legend. He crushed High Volcanus. He besieged Hellsreach. He outmaneuvered generals and tore through tanks like paper. But most importantly, he met his mirror, Commissar Yarrick, the only man who stood unshaken, the only human Ghazghkull couldn't break. And that fascinated him. Their rivalry became the heartbeat of an age. The prophet and the executioner, the green god of war, and the iron-willed man who refused to die. Even when Ghazghkull withdrew, he didn't lose. He chose to leave, because Armageddon wasn't ready. Not yet. The WAAAGH still had growing to do, and it did. He returned stronger, smarter, more organized. The third war for Armageddon erupted like a volcano, and the galaxy felt it. He broke cities, killed heroes, swallowed continents in holy fire. And again, he left, not defeated, strategic. Each campaign was a step in the divine march toward the final WAAAGH. But Ghazghkull doesn't just destroy. He builds. In Octarian sector, he saw an opportunity no one else did. The Tyranids, another force of endless hunger, another wall of violence to push against. So he threw his orcs into the meat grinder, not to win, to sharpen, to teach them what it meant to fight without end. The Octarian War became a laboratory of slaughter, orcs and Tyranids feeding off each other in an arms race of savagery. And Ghazghkull watched it burn with pride. He was killed, briefly, but death means nothing when belief is stronger. Mad Doke Grotznik stitched him back together. Better, bigger, touched. His new warplate crackled with something that wasn't just technology. His claw and cannon, named Gork's Claw and Mork's Roar, felt like relics, like holy artifacts. Weapons as much of faith as of metal. He rose from death not diminished, but sanctified. And when the galaxy tore itself open with the birth of the Great Rift, Ghazghkull laughed, because this was what he had been waiting for, the age of WAAAGH. In the chaos of the Indomitus era, as the Imperium flailed and the warp howled, Ghazghkull moved like a plague, fast, loud, glorious. His warband spread like wildfire, no longer scattered mobs, but pilgrimages, crusades of flame and teeth. The Imperium now ranks him as a galactic threat, a creature who bends reality around him, a being not merely of muscle and madness, but of faith-powered distortion, because the truth no longer matters. The myth is the truth. He is no longer a war boss. He is WAAAGH, made flesh, among the orcs. He's become a symbol of what's possible, not just to fight, but to believe. His name is painted on thousands of ships, screamed across billions of throats, not as command, but as worship, And his legacy? It's still unfolding. Even in death, even in withdrawal, even in silence, the idea of Ghazghkull moves. He's become part of the Ork soul, part of the galaxy's nightmare. He taught his kind to organize, to evolve, to dream of something bigger than loot and punch-ups. He made orcs dangerous not just because they fight, but because they know why they fight. And when he next rises, when the final WAAAGH begins, no one will be ready. Not Guilliman, not the Eldari, not the Necrons, not even the gods, because this isn't just war. This is Ghazghkull's vision, and it hasn't ended. It's only just begun.